The morning sun cast long shadows across the Galactic Academy of Xenobiology as students from dozens of worlds hurried to their classes. Purple-skinned Zephyrians glided through the corridors on their wing-like arms, while insect-like Crickstal clicked their way along the walls. Plant creatures called Verdani swayed in their mobile biopods, and crystalline beings hummed softly as they moved, but today was different. Today, the Academy would welcome its first human student. Jake Morrison stood at the entrance of Building 7, looking up at the massive structure that housed the biology department. The building was made of some kind of translucent material that seemed to shift colors in the sunlight. Everything here was so different from Earth, but that was exactly why he had come. He checked his schedule tablet one more time. Advanced Predator Studies, Room 347, Professor Keflin. Jake had been looking forward to this class since he first heard about the exchange program. On Earth, he had studied wildlife biology, but here he would learn about creatures from across the galaxy. The hallways were wide and tall, designed to accommodate species of all sizes. Jake felt small as he walked past students who towered over him and others who scurried along the floor on multiple legs. Some turned to stare at him with various kinds of eyes, tentacles, or sensory organs. He had grown used to the attention. During his first week at the Academy, humans were rare out here, and most aliens had never seen one in person. Room 347 was larger than Jake had expected. The ceiling curved high above, and the walls were lined with containment fields that held various specimens. The desks were arranged in a semicircle, each one designed to accommodate different body types. Jake found a standard humanoid desk near the back and settled in. The other students were already there, about 20 of them from at least 8 different species. They spoke in various languages, but Jake's translator device converted everything into English for him. Most of the conversation stopped when he entered, and he could feel their curious gazes. A tall Zephyrian female with pale blue skin turned to look at him. Her large silver eyes studied him with obvious interest. "You are the human," she said, her voice melodic even through the translator. "I am Lyra. We have heard much about your species." "All good things, I hope," Jake replied with a smile. Lyra's expression was hard to read. "Your people come from what we call a death world, a planet so dangerous that most galactic species could not survive there for more than a few hours." Jake nodded. "Earth can be challenging, but it's home. We adapt." Before Lyra could respond, the classroom door opened and Professor Keflin entered. The professor was a Veltari, a species Jake had read about but never seen in person. Keflin was about 7 feet tall, with pale green skin that seemed to shimmer in the light. Instead of arms, he had 4 thick tentacles that moved with surprising grace. His head was elongated, with large, multifaceted eyes that could apparently see in multiple spectrums of light. "Good morning, students," Professor Keflin said, his voice deep and resonant. "Today we have a special addition to our class. Jake Morrison from Earth has joined us as part of the interspecies exchange program." The professor's large eyes focused on Jake. "Perhaps you would like to introduce yourself and tell us about your homeworld?" Jake stood up, feeling the weight of everyone's attention. "I'm Jake Morrison. I studied wildlife biology on Earth, which is why I'm interested in this class. Earth is what you call a death world, but to us it's just home. We have many different environments and many different kinds of dangerous animals." "Dangerous how?" asked a student Jake hadn't met yet. This one was crystalline, like living glass, and his voice chimed like wind chimes when he spoke. "Well, we have large predators like bears and big cats that can kill a human with a single swipe. We have venomous snakes and spiders whose bites can kill in minutes. We have crocodiles that can crush bones and sharks that can bite a person in half. Our oceans have creatures with tentacles that can drag a ship underwater, and our forests have animals that hunt in packs." The classroom had gone completely silent. Several students had moved slightly away from Jake during his description. "And yet," Professor Keflin observed, "humans became the dominant species on this death world. How is this possible?" Jake thought about how to explain it. "We're not the strongest or fastest, but we're good at working together and using tools. We're also very good at adapting to new situations. Fascinating, the professor said. Well, Jake Morrison, today's lesson should be particularly interesting for you. We will be studying one of the most dangerous predators known to galactic science. Professor Keflin moved to the center of the room, where a large containment field hummed with energy. With a gesture of one tentacle, he activated the field's transparency mode. The class gasped as the creature inside became visible. The thing was like nothing Jake had ever seen, even in his wildest nightmares. It stood about 7 feet tall on 2 powerful legs, but its body was all wrong. Its skin was black as space, with a metallic sheen that reflected the classroom lights. It had 6 arms, each ending in claws that looked like they could cut through steel. Its head was elongated and eyeless, but Jake could tell it was aware of everything around it. "Students, meet our Void Stalker," Professor Keflin announced. "This specimen comes from Kepler 442b, a world even more hostile than most Deathworlds. The gravity there is 3 times what most of you are used to. The atmosphere would poison you in seconds, and the radiation levels would kill most species in minutes." The creature moved inside its containment field, and Jake noticed how fluid its movements were. Every step was perfectly balanced, every turn economical and precise. This was a creature built for killing. The Void Stalker is considered the perfect predator, the professor continued. It has no natural enemies on its homeworld. Its claws can cut through military armor, its hide can stop most weapons, and its hunting instincts are so refined that it can track prey across continents. One of the Crickstal students clicked nervously. "Professor, are we safe?" "The containment field will hold, yes?" "Of course," Professor Keflin assured them. "This field could contain a small starship. But watch the creature's behavior. Notice how it evaluates each of you." Jake watched as the Void Stalker's eyeless head turned toward each student in turn. When it looked at the Zephyrians, its posture was aggressive, predatory. When it turned toward the crystalline student, its claws extended slightly as if testing the air. The plant-based Verdani caused it to tilt its head, perhaps confused by their unusual biology, but when the creature's attention turned to Jake, something unexpected happened. The Void Stalker's entire posture changed. Its aggressive stance relaxed and its claws retracted. It stood perfectly still, its head tilted at an angle that seemed almost respectful. "Interesting," Professor Keflin murmured. "Class, observe the Void Stalker's reaction to our human student. This is most unusual behavior." Every eye in the room turned to Jake, who sat calmly in his chair. He met the creature's eyeless gaze without flinching, studying it with the same intensity it was studying him. "Jake Morrison," the professor said, his voice filled with curiosity, "the Void Stalker appears to have identified you as the most significant threat in this room. This is remarkable, considering your apparent lack of natural weapons or armor. What do you think it sees when it looks at you?" Jake was quiet for a moment, considering the question. The Void Stalker hadn't moved, hadn't looked away from him. It was like the creature was waiting for something. "I think," Jake said slowly, "it recognizes something familiar, something it understands." "And what would that be?" Professor Keflin asked. Jake smiled, but there was something in his expression that made several students uncomfortable. "Another predator?" The Void Stalker's head moved in what might have been a nod of acknowledgement. The classroom fell silent, except for the hum of the containment field and the soft sound of various species breathing. Outside, the alien sun continued its path across the sky, but inside room 347, a new understanding was beginning to take shape. Jake Morrison, the quiet human from the death world called Earth, had just been recognized by one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators as an equal, and somehow that recognition felt like the beginning of something important. The next morning, Jake arrived at the classroom early. He wanted to observe the Void Stalker before the other students arrived. The creature was still in its containment field, but now it seemed to be waiting. As soon as Jake entered the room, its eyeless head turned toward him. Jake pulled up a chair and sat down facing the containment field. The Void Stalker moved closer to the energy barrier, as close as it could get. They studied each other in silence. "You're wondering what I am, aren't you?" Jake said quietly. The creature's head tilted slightly, as if it could understand him. Professor Keflin entered the room and saw Jake sitting near the containment field. Ah, Jake Morrison. You're early today. I see you are fascinated by our specimen. It's fascinating, Jake agreed. I've never seen anything quite like it. Nor have most beings in the galaxy, the professor replied. The Void Stalker is unique among predators. It has no fear, no hesitation, no doubt. It simply kills. But it's not trying to kill me, Jake observed. Professor Keflin's tentacles moved in what Jake had learned was the Veltari equivalent of a frown. No, it is not. This troubles me greatly. In all my years of study, I have never seen a Void Stalker show anything but aggression toward other species. The other students began arriving, and Jake returned to his seat. Lyra, the Zephyrian student, sat down next to him. You seem comfortable around the creature, she said. It doesn't want to hurt me, Jake replied. I can tell. How can you tell? It has no eyes, no facial expressions. Jake considered the question. Body language. The way it moves, the way it positions itself. It's like reading an animal back on Earth. Lyra looked confused. But surely you cannot read an alien creature the same way you read Earth animals? Predators are predators, Jake said. Some things are universal. Professor Keflin called the class to attention. Yesterday we observed unusual behavior from our Void Stalker. Today we will investigate this behavior using the Academy's advanced scanning equipment. The professor activated several machines around the room. Lights began to scan both Jake and the Void Stalker. Holographic displays showed various readings and measurements. The Void Stalker's brain activity is most interesting, Professor Keflin announced. It shows patterns we have never recorded before. Instead of the typical hunting responses, it displays what we might call curiosity. A student Jake didn't recognize raised her hand. She was from a species he hadn't seen before, with purple skin and multiple eyes. Professor, how can we be sure the human is not in danger? Perhaps the creature is simply planning a more complex attack. An excellent question, the professor replied. Let us examine the biological data. The holographic displays changed to show detailed scans of both creatures. Jake could see his own heartbeat, breathing pattern, and brain activity displayed for the entire class. The Void Stalker's readings were shown alongside his. Notice Jake Morrison's vital signs, Professor Keflin said. His heart rate is normal, his breathing is steady, and his brain shows no signs of stress or fear. This is remarkable, considering he is in the presence of one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators. But what about the Void Stalker? Asked Zenter, the crystalline student. What is it thinking? That is the mystery, the professor admitted. The creature's brain patterns suggest it is analyzing Jake Morrison, but not as prey. It appears to be trying to understand him. Lyra spoke up. Professor, you said yesterday that the Void Stalker could identify threats. What level of threat does it perceive from Jake? Professor Keflin manipulated the holographic controls, bringing up a threat assessment display. The room fell silent as the readings appeared. According to our equipment, the Void Stalker rates Jake Morrison as a Class 5 threat, the professor announced. The students began chattering excitedly. Jake heard several gasps and what sounded like alien curses. Class 5? Lyra whispered. That's higher than most military weapons. Professor, called out a crystal student, surely there is an error in the equipment. A human cannot be more dangerous than a Void Stalker. The equipment is functioning perfectly, Professor Keflin replied. The Void Stalker itself is rated as a Class 4 threat. This suggests that it perceives Jake Morrison as more dangerous than itself. Jake felt all eyes in the room turn to him. He tried to look as non-threatening as possible, but he could see the fear in many of his classmates' expressions. I don't understand, said a Verdani student, her voice rustling like leaves. Humans have no natural weapons, no armor, no enhanced abilities. How can one be more dangerous than a Void Stalker? Perhaps, Professor Keflin said thoughtfully, we are asking the wrong question. Instead of asking how Jake Morrison can be more dangerous, we should ask why the Void Stalker thinks he is. The professor approached Jake's desk. Jake Morrison, would you be willing to help us understand this mystery? Would you share with us what makes humans successful predators on your death world? Jake looked around the room at the expectant faces. Some showed curiosity, others showed fear, and a few showed what might have been respect. I'm not sure where to start, Jake said honestly. Humans aren't the strongest animals on Earth. We're not the fastest. We don't have the best senses, and we don't have natural weapons. Then how did you become the dominant species? Zenter asked. Jake thought about it. We're persistent. When we hunt something, we don't give up. We can track an animal for days, weeks if necessary. We're also very good at working together and using tools. But many species use tools, Lara pointed out, and many species cooperate in hunting. True, Jake agreed, but humans do something else. We don't just hunt animals, we hunt other hunters. The room became very quiet. What do you mean? Professor Kethlin asked. On Earth, the most dangerous predators became our prey, Jake explained. We hunted the hunters. Bears, big cats, wolves, crocodiles. If it was dangerous, we figured out how to kill it. But why? Asked the purple-skinned student. Why hunt creatures that could kill you? Jake paused, trying to find the right words. Because they were competition. Because they were threats to our families, because we could. The Void Stalker moved closer to the containment field as if it was trying to hear better. You see, Jake continued, humans don't just survive on Earth, we control it. We decided which animals live and which animals die. We turned predators into pets and prey animals into food sources. We changed the entire planet to suit our needs. Impossible, whispered one of the students. The Void Stalker believes it, Jake said, nodding toward the containment field. It recognizes something in me that its instincts understand. It sees a creature that doesn't just hunt for food or territory. It sees a creature that hunts because it can. Professor Keflin's tentacles writhed with excitement. Are you saying that humans hunt for reasons other than survival? Sometimes, Jake admitted. We hunt for sport, for challenge, for the thrill of it. We seek out the most dangerous prey because it tests our skills. And the Void Stalker recognizes this? Lara asked. Jake looked at the creature, which had not moved away from the containment field. I think it recognizes a kindred spirit, something that understands the hunt not just as survival, but as art. The classroom was silent for a long moment, then Professor Kethlin spoke. Class, I believe we have stumbled upon something extraordinary. We may be witnessing the first recorded instance of interspecies recognition between apex predators. What does that mean? Asked Zenter. It means, the professor said slowly, that we may need to reconsider everything we thought we knew about predator behavior. Jake stood up and walked closer to the containment field. The Void Stalker moved to meet him, pressing against the energy barrier. Tomorrow, Professor Kethlin announced, we will conduct a controlled experiment. With proper safety measures. Of course, what kind of experiment? Lyra asked nervously. The professor's large eyes gleamed with scientific curiosity. We will see what happens when two apex predators are allowed to interact. Jake smiled, but several students looked terrified outside the classroom windows. The alien sun was setting, casting long shadows across the academy grounds. But inside room 347, the real test was yet to come. The next day, Jake found himself standing outside the Academy's combat simulation chamber. The massive door was 3 times his height and made of the same shimmering material as the rest of the building. Through the transparent sections, he could see a rocky landscape that looked like something from an alien planet. Professor Kethlin stood beside him, checking readings on a handheld device. The simulation chamber can create any environment we wish, the professor explained. Today, we have programmed it to resemble the canyon systems of Kepler 442b, the Void Stalker's homeworld. Jake nodded, looking through the transparent door. At the maze of rocks and shadows inside. And I'm supposed to just walk around in there? The goal is simply to observe natural behavior, Professor Kethlin assured him. You are under no obligation to interact with the creature. The containment field will be expanded to allow the Void Stalker freedom of movement, but emergency protocols remain in place. Behind them, a group of Academy officials and students had gathered to watch. Jake recognized Lyra and Zenter among them, along with several professors he had never met. Administrator Vexel, a nervous-looking official with 7 eyes, kept checking his own devices. "Are you certain this is safe?" Administrator Vexel asked for the 3rd time. "A human student alone with an unrestricted void stalker?" "The safety systems are completely automated," Professor Keflin replied. "If the creature shows any aggressive behavior toward Jake Morrison, the containment field will immediately activate." Jake put on the communication device that would let him talk to the observers. "I'm ready," he said. The massive door opened with a soft hiss, and Jake stepped into the simulation chamber. The air felt different here, thicker and warmer than the Academy's corridors. The rocky landscape stretched out before him, full of caves, ledges, and narrow passages. It was like stepping into an alien world. The door closed behind him with a soft thud. And Jake was alone, well, almost alone, somewhere in this maze of rocks and shadows. The Void Stalker was waiting. Jake began walking, choosing a path that led deeper into the canyon. His footsteps echoed softly off the stone walls. The lighting was dim, creating deep shadows that could hide anything. Through his communication device, he could hear Professor Kethlin's voice providing commentary to the observers. "Notice how Jake Morrison moves through the environment. His pace is steady, unhurried. He shows no signs of fear or stress." Jake continued walking, but he was far from relaxed. Every sense was alert, every muscle ready. This was familiar territory for him, not because he had been here before, but because he had been in situations like this many times on Earth, tracking dangerous animals through unfamiliar terrain was something humans had been doing for thousands of years. "The Void Stalker has been released into the opposite end of the chamber," Professor Kethlin's voice continued. "It is now free to move throughout the environment." Jake paused at a junction where 3 paths met. He crouched down and examined the ground carefully. The artificial stone was covered with a thin layer of dust, and he could see footprints. Not his own. The Void Stalker had been here recently. Jake stood up and continued along the center path. He moved quietly now, placing each foot carefully. The creature was somewhere ahead of him, but he couldn't see it yet. "Fascinating," Professor Kethlin's voice said. "The Void Stalker is displaying classic hunting behavior. It is using the terrain to its advantage, moving through the shadows and positioning itself for an ambush." Jake reached another junction and stopped. This time, he didn't look at the ground. Instead, he tilted his head slightly and listened. There, a soft scraping sound like claws on stone. It came from his left, from a passage that led up to a higher level of the canyon. "The human appears to be unaware of the creature's location," said another voice, one of the professors Jake didn't recognize. Jake almost smiled. He could hear everything they were saying through his communication device, but he chose not to respond. Let them think he was unaware. He continued straight ahead, but his route wasn't random. Each turn he took, each path he chose, was carefully planned. He was doing something humans had perfected over thousands of years of hunting. He was herding his prey. The Void Stalker was a perfect predator, but that perfection made it predictable. It would seek the high ground, the best vantage point, the optimal position for an attack. Jake was counting on this. He turned left at the next junction, then right at the one after that. Each choice appeared casual, but he was gradually limiting the creature's options. "The Void Stalker is moving to intercept," Professor Keflin announced. It has positioned itself on a ledge above Jake Morrison's path. Jake kept walking, but now he could feel the creature's presence. It was close, probably directly above him. He could sense its weight on the rocks, could smell its alien scent in the air. Most importantly, he could hear its breathing. The Void Stalker was preparing to strike. Jake stopped walking and spoke into his communication device. "I know you're there," he said calmly. Through the speakers, he heard several gasps from the observers. "The human has detected the Void Stalker," Professor Keflin said, his voice filled with amazement. "But how? The creature is completely silent." "Silent. To you," Jake replied, "but not to me. I can hear its breathing pattern, I can smell where it's been, and I can feel the air move when it shifts position." Jake turned to face the ledge where the Void Stalker was hiding. The creature was invisible in the shadows, but Jake looked directly at its position. Plus, Jake added, I've been tracking its footprints for the last 10 minutes. I know exactly where it is. The Void Stalker emerged from the shadows, no longer attempting to hide. It stood on the ledge about 15 feet above Jake, its black form imposing against the artificial stone. But more importantly, Jake continued, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber, I've been studying its behavior. It's a perfect predator, which means it thinks like one. It looks for the best ambush point, the most advantageous position, the optimal kill zone. The Void Stalker's head tilted, as if it was listening carefully. The problem with being a perfect predator, Jake said, is that you become predictable to something that evolved to hunt predators. Jake began walking again, this time directly toward the cliff face below the creature's position. You see, he explained to the observers, humans didn't just evolve to be hunters. We evolved to be hunters of hunters. We learned to think like our prey, to anticipate their moves, to turn their strengths against them. The Void Stalker's posture changed. It was no longer in an attack position. Instead, it seemed to be listening, watching, learning. Right now, Jake said, it's trying to figure out what I am. Its instincts are telling it I'm prey, but its intelligence is telling it something different. Jake reached the base of the cliff and began climbing. The artificial rock had plenty of handholds, and he moved up steadily toward the creature's position. Jake Morrison, Professor Keflin's voice came through the speaker. What are you doing? Proving a point? Jake replied as he climbed. The Void Stalker could have attacked him easily during the climb. Jake was vulnerable, exposed, unable to defend himself properly. But the creature made no move to harm him. Instead, it backed away from the edge, giving Jake room to climb onto the ledge. Jake pulled himself up and stood facing the Void Stalker. They were now on the same level, only a few feet apart. The creature could kill him with a single swipe of its claws, but it didn't move. You're not sure what I am, are you? Jake said, speaking directly to the creature now. Part of you sees easy prey. But another part, the part that's kept your species alive for millions of years, is screaming warnings. The Void Stalker's head moved slightly, almost like a nod. You're feeling something your species probably hasn't felt in a very long time, Jake continued. Uncertainty, doubt, maybe even a little fear. Jake took a step closer. The creature tensed but didn't retreat. You evolved to be the perfect killer on your world, Jake said softly. Nothing could challenge you, nothing could threaten you, nothing could outsmart you. But humans evolved on a world where everything was trying to kill us. We had to become better than perfect. We had to become adaptable. Jake reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out his Academy datapad. Several observers gasped, but Jake held up his free hand in a peaceful gesture. Relax, he said. It's just a datapad. But watch this. He showed the device to the Void Stalker, then gently tossed it onto the ground between them. The creature's attention focused on the small object. That device contains everything the Academy knows about your species, Jake explained. Biological data, behavioral patterns, hunting strategies, weaknesses. I've been studying it since I arrived here. The Void Stalker looked from the datapad to Jake, then back to the device. In the 20 minutes we've been in this chamber, Jake continued, I've identified at least 15 different ways I could neutralize you if I had to. Your species is powerful, but you're also predictable. The creature's posture changed again. The aggressive stance was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like respect. But here's the thing, Jake said, his voice taking on a warmer tone. I don't want to fight you. Humans don't just kill. We also protect, we form alliances, we turn enemies into friends. Jake extended his hand toward the Void Stalker. The observation room was completely silent as Jake and the Void Stalker stood together on the rocky ledge. The creature's claw remained gently touching Jake's palm, and neither of them moved. It was as if time had stopped. Administrator Vexel was the first to break the silence. This is impossible, he whispered, his 7 eyes focused on the scene before them. Void Stalkers do not make peaceful contact. They kill or they retreat. There's no third option. Professor Keflin was busy recording everything on multiple devices. We are witnessing history, he said, his tentacles moving rapidly over the controls. The first recorded instance of interspecies communication with a void stalker. On the ledge, Jake slowly pulled his hand back, and the creature allowed it. The void stalker then did something that made everyone watching gasp. It sat down. The most dangerous predator in the galaxy had just assumed a resting position in front of a human. Jake Morrison, Professor Keflin said through the communication system, can you explain what is happening? Jake looked at the creature, which was now at eye level with him. We're getting to know each other, he said simply. It's trying to understand what I am, and I'm trying to understand what it is. But you are different species from different worlds, Lyra said, her voice filled with confusion. How can you understand each other? Jake sat down as well, facing the void stalker. Predators have a language that goes beyond words, he explained. It's about respect, territory, and survival. This creature has spent its entire life being the most dangerous thing on its planet. It's never had to consider that something else might be more dangerous. The void stalker's head tilted slightly as if it was listening carefully to every word. But now it's met something that challenges everything it thought it knew, Jake continued. It's met a creature that doesn't look dangerous, doesn't act dangerous, but somehow is dangerous. It's confused, and that confusion is making it curious instead of aggressive. What do you mean by dangerous? Asked Zenter, the crystalline student. You have no weapons, no armor, no enhanced strength? Jake smiled. That's exactly what makes me dangerous. Everything else this creature has ever encountered has been predictable. Big predators are strong and fast. Small prey animals are weak and quick, but humans are something different. The void stalker made a soft sound, almost like a purr. Jake looked at it with interest. You're starting to understand, aren't you? Jake said to the creature. You're realizing that the most dangerous predator isn't always the one with the biggest teeth. Through the communication system, Professor Keflin asked, Jake Morrison, would you be willing to demonstrate what you mean, in a controlled way, of course? Jake stood up, and the void stalker immediately became alert. But instead of moving away, it also stood, watching Jake's every movement. Look at how it's positioned itself, Jake said, gesturing to the creature. It's not preparing to attack. It's not preparing to defend. It's preparing to learn. Jake picked up a small rock from the ledge and held it up. This is a tool, he said. It's not much, but in human hands it becomes a weapon, a communication device, or a problem-solving instrument. He tossed the rock toward a distant ledge. It bounced off the stone wall and landed exactly where he had aimed. The void stalker's head followed the rock's path with obvious interest. Precision, Jake explained. Humans can make tools do exactly what we want them to do. We can hit targets at distances that would be impossible for natural weapons. The creature moved to the edge of the ledge and looked down at where the rock had landed. Then it looked back at Jake. But it's not just about tools, Jake continued. It's about thinking ahead, planning, adapting to new situations. Jake began walking along the ledge, and the void stalker followed him. They moved together like two predators sharing territory, each respecting the other's space. On Earth, Jake said, humans learned to hunt in groups. We would surround our prey, cut off escape routes, and force them to go where we wanted them to go. We turned hunting into a science. The void stalker stopped walking and looked at Jake with what seemed like recognition. You're understanding now, Jake said. In the chamber earlier, I wasn't just wandering around randomly. I was hurting you. I was controlling your movement, making you go where I wanted you to go. The creature's posture changed again. It seemed almost impressed. The difference between a predator and an apex predator, Jake explained, is that a predator reacts to its environment. An apex predator controls its environment. Professor Keflin's voice came through the communication system. Jake Morrison, are you saying that humans are apex predators because of your intelligence? Not just intelligence, Jake replied, adaptability. Every other species in the galaxy seems to be perfectly adapted to one specific environment or situation. But humans are generalists. We can survive anywhere, eat almost anything, and adapt to any challenge. Jake sat down again, and the Void Stalker joined him. They sat side by side looking out over the artificial canyon. "This creature is the perfect predator for its world," Jake said. "But put it on a different planet with different prey and different challenges, and it would struggle. Humans, on the other hand, have colonized every environment on Earth. Deserts, forests, mountains, islands, frozen wastelands. We make homes wherever we go." The Void Stalker made another soft sound, this one almost like agreement. "And when we encounter something we can't beat with strength or speed," Jake continued, "we get creative. We use tools, we work together, we change our tactics, we never give up." Lyra's voice came through the speaker. "But surely other species are also persistent?" "Maybe," Jake said. "But how many other species deliberately seek out the most dangerous prey? How many other species hunt for sport rather than just survival?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. "Humans don't just hunt to eat," Jake explained. "We hunt to test ourselves. We seek out the biggest, strongest, most dangerous animals specifically because they're dangerous. We want to prove that we can overcome anything." The Void Stalkers. Attention was completely focused on Jake now. "And when we encounter something that's too dangerous to hunt," Jake said, "we find another way. We domesticate it, we turn it into a partner instead of prey." Jake looked directly at the creature. "That's what I'm offering you. Not defeat, not submission, but partnership. A chance to be part of something bigger than just survival." The Void Stalker was quiet for a long moment. Then it did something that shocked everyone watching. It lay down, placing its head near Jake's feet in a gesture that was clearly submissive. "No," Jake said firmly. "Not submission, partnership." He reached out and gently touched the creature's head. "You're not inferior to me. You're just different. You're a perfect killer, and I'm a perfect adapter. Together, we're more than either of us could be alone." The Void Stalker raised its head and looked at Jake with what could only be described as understanding. "This is unprecedented, Administrator," Vexel said, his voice filled with awe. "The implications are staggering. If humans can form partnerships with the most dangerous predators in the galaxy... then maybe," Jake said, "the galaxy doesn't need to fear humans. Maybe we can all learn from each other." Professor Keflin's tentacles writhed with excitement. "Jake Morrison, you have revolutionized our understanding of predator behavior. This creature has accepted you not as a threat to be eliminated, but as an equal to be respected." Jake stood up, and the Void Stalker rose with him. They faced each other one more time, and Jake extended his hand. The creature touched it gently with its claw, and Jake could feel something pass between them, understanding, respect, the beginning of friendship. "The experiment is complete," Jake said into his communication device. "Permission to return to the observation area?" "Granted," Professor Keflin replied. "But Jake Morrison, I have one final question. How did you know this would work?" Jake smiled as he and the Void Stalker began walking toward the exit together. "Because," he said, "every apex predator recognizes another apex predator, and every intelligent creature, no matter how dangerous, prefers cooperation to conflict." As they walked through the chamber together, Jake reflected on what had just happened. He had just proved that humans weren't the monsters the galaxy thought. They were something much more interesting. They were the species that could turn enemies into allies, predators into partners, and fear into friendship. The Void Stalker walked beside him, no longer a dangerous specimen, but a new companion, in a galaxy full of possibilities. 2 weeks had passed since the experiment in the simulation chamber, and everything at the Galactic Academy of Xenobiology had changed. Jake Morrison no longer sat in the back of the classroom. Instead, he had a desk at the front next to Professor Keflin's teaching station. His new role as teaching assistant had been approved by the Academy administration after careful consideration, but the biggest change was the Void Stalker. The creature now had a name. Jake had started calling it Shadow, and the name had stuck. Shadow's containment field had been modified with new controls that allowed the creature to move freely when Jake was present. The Academy Safety Committee had initially opposed this change, but the evidence was clear. Shadow showed no aggressive behavior toward any student or faculty member as long as Jake was nearby on this particular morning. Jake arrived early to find Shadow already waiting for him. The creature had developed a routine of positioning itself near the front of the containment field whenever Jake entered the room. Today, as every day for the past 2 weeks, Shadow's eyeless head turned toward Jake in what had become a greeting. "Good morning, Shadow," Jake said, approaching the containment field. The creature made a soft sound that Jake had learned meant acknowledgement. Professor Kethlin entered the classroom carrying an armload of data tablets. "Ah, Jake Morrison, you are early again. I see our friend is eager to begin today's lesson." The professor had been different since the experiment. His scientific excitement was obvious in the way his tentacles moved and how quickly he spoke. The discovery of interspecies communication with a void stalker had made him famous throughout the galaxy. Universities from dozens of worlds had sent representatives to study what had happened. "What's the lesson plan for today?" Jake asked, settling into his chair. "Today we have visitors," Professor Kethlin replied, his large eyes gleaming with anticipation. "The Galactic Council has sent a delegation to observe our new teaching methods." Jake felt a flutter of nervousness. The Galactic Council was the governing body for all civilized species in the galaxy. Having their attention meant that what had happened in this classroom had implications far beyond academic curiosity. The other students began arriving, and Jake noticed that they behaved differently around him now. The fear was gone, replaced by curiosity and respect. Lyra, the Zephyrian student, had even started sitting in the front row so she could better observe Jake's interactions with Shadow. "Jake," Lyra said as she settled into her seat, "I have been reading about human history. Is it true that your species domesticated other predators?" "Yes," Jake replied. "We turned wolves into dogs, wildcats into house cats, and even some bears into working animals. We have a long history of forming partnerships with other species." Zenter, the crystalline student, chimed in with his musical voice. "But how do you know which predators can be domesticated and which cannot?" Jake considered the question. "We try different approaches and see what works. Some species respond to food, others to protection, and some to simple companionship. The key is understanding what each species needs." Shadow moved closer to the front of the containment field, as if it was listening to the conversation. Jake had noticed that the creature seemed to understand more each day, even though it couldn't speak. "And Shadow?" asked a new student, a slug-like creature whose name Jake was still learning. "What did it need?" Jake looked at the void stalker, which had turned its attention to him. Shadow needed something it had never had before. It needed an equal, something that could challenge it intellectually instead of just physically. The classroom door opened, and Professor Kethlin tentacles straightened with formality. "Students, please welcome our distinguished visitors from the Galactic Council." 3 beings entered the room, each representing a different major species in the galaxy. The first was a tall, elegant Altarian with silver skin and flowing robes. The second was a stocky Corvanian with thick armor plating and multiple arms. The third was a being Jake had never seen before, something that looked like a living cloud of energy contained within a mechanical suit. "Honored council members," Professor Kethlin said, bowing in the traditional Veltari manner, "welcome to Advanced Predator Studies. I am Professor Kethlin, and this is my teaching assistant, Jake Morrison." The Altarian stepped forward, her movements graceful and precise. "I am Counselor Raven. We have come to observe the reported breakthrough in interspecies communication." Jake stood up, feeling the weight of their attention. "Thank you for coming. We're happy to demonstrate what we've learned." The Corvanian council member, who introduced himself as Counselor Thrak, looked at Shadow with obvious skepticism. "This creature has killed representatives of 7 different species. How can you claim it is safe?" "Because," Jake replied, "it's not just safe. It's cooperative. Jake walked to the containment field controls and began entering the deactivation sequence. Several people in the room tensed, but Jake's movements were calm and confident. Jake. Morrison, Counselor Raven said. Surely you do not intend to release the creature with so many people present? Shadow has been free in this room for 2 weeks, Jake replied. It has never shown aggression toward anyone. The containment field shimmered and disappeared. Shadow immediately stepped forward, but instead of moving toward the council members or students, it walked directly to Jake's side. The room was completely silent. Remarkable, whispered the third council member, whose voice came from speakers on its mechanical suit. The creature shows clear signs of bonding behavior. Shadow positioned itself next to Jake, its body language relaxed and non-threatening. Jake reached out and gently touched the creature's head, and Shadow leaned into the contact. 2 weeks ago, Jake said, everyone in this room was afraid of Shadow. Today it's a member of our class. Lyra raised her hand. Jake, could you explain to the council members how this transformation happened? Jake nodded. It started with understanding. Shadow is a perfect predator, but it had never encountered something that could match its intelligence. When we met, it recognized that I was different from other prey species. Different how? Asked Counselor Thrak. I wasn't afraid, Jake replied. I was curious. Instead of seeing Shadow as a monster, I saw it as a potential partner. Shadow made a soft sound, almost like agreement. The key, Jake continued, was respect. I didn't try to dominate Shadow or prove I was superior. I showed it that I understood what it was and what it needed. Counselor Araven moved closer, her silver eyes studying both Jake and Shadow. And what did it need? Mental stimulation, Jake replied. Shadow is incredibly intelligent, but it had never had anything to challenge that intelligence. It was bored. When I started treating it like an equal rather than a specimen, it responded positively. Professor Keflin stepped forward. Council. Members, this breakthrough has implications beyond academic study. If humans can form partnerships with the most dangerous predators in the galaxy, what other species might they be able to communicate with? The council members exchanged glances. Finally, Counselor Raven spoke. Jake Morrison, your species has been classified as dangerous Deathworlders since first contact. Your homeworld is considered too hostile for most galactic species to visit. Yet you stand here, having formed a bond with a creature that has killed trained warriors. Jake felt the weight of the moment. Counselor, I think there's been a misunderstanding about humans. We're not dangerous because we want to hurt people. We're dangerous because we're good at solving problems. What kind of problems? Asked the energy being. Any kind, Jake replied. On Earth, we faced every challenge possible. Extreme weather, dangerous predators, hostile environments, limited resources. We learned to adapt to anything. Shadow moved slightly, positioning itself so it could see all the visitors while remaining close to Jake. And when we couldn't adapt, Jake continued, we learned to change our environment to suit us. We didn't just survive on Earth, we made it our home. Counselor Thrak's multiple arms gestured toward Shadow. You are claiming that your species can turn any dangerous creature into an ally? Not any creature, Jake admitted, but many of them. The key is understanding what they need and finding ways to meet those needs. Professor Keflin activated a holographic display showing data from the past 2 weeks. Council members, Shadow's behavior has changed dramatically. It shows curiosity about other species, it responds to simple commands, and it has even begun to show protective behavior toward the students. Protective behavior? Counselor Raven asked. Lyra spoke up. Yesterday, a maintenance robot malfunctioned and began moving erratically near the classroom. Shadow immediately positioned itself between the robot and the students until Professor Keflin could shut it down. The council members looked impressed despite themselves. Furthermore, Professor Keflin continued, Shadow has begun to demonstrate problem-solving abilities we never knew it possessed. It can open simple locks, navigate complex puzzles, and even communicate basic concepts through body language. Jake smiled. Shadow was always intelligent. It just needed someone to recognize that intelligence and give it opportunities to use it, the energy being floated closer to Jake and Shadow. Human Jake Morrison, what do you propose we do with this information? Jake looked around the room at the faces of his classmates.